We're always talking about the power of big tech, how platforms shape what we buy or what we read. But if you really step back and look at the whole system, something else is going on. We're seeing this quiet, systematic formation of what you could only call a new digital oligarchy.
That's the perfect way to put it. It's a crucial distinction. Because when people hear oligarch, they immediately picture, the Gilded Age robber barons building these massive mansions, pulling political strings so obviously. This new group, they operate in a totally different space. Their power isn't in physical assets or titles. It's in the quiet control of infrastructure, in the management of digital trust, and in these really complex, unseen networks.
So it's influence that's built on making us dependent, not on outright domination.
Exactly.
And the thing that makes it so hard to even see, let alone regulate, is that the very culture we admire, this culture of constant innovation, is actually what hides it and fuels it.
Yes. That's what we really need to unpack in this deep dive. Our goal is to look at the three main areas where this power is being used. First, there's this huge shift in infrastructure control, moving from, steel and concrete to just .code. Second, the systems of digital trust that basically decide who and what is credible online. And third, the shadow networks that quietly shape behavior without anyone really noticing.
And to really get it, you have to realize this pattern isn't new. I mean, it's as old as civilization itself. The historians always point out that real power, true societal control, has always belonged to whoever managed the essential routes for commerce and communication.
Absolutely. Think about the Roman Empire. Yes, the legions were there, but what truly held the empire together, it was the roads, the aqueducts. That infrastructure is what sustained the economy, what gave the rulers legitimacy.
Right. And fast forward to, say, 19th century America.
Same pattern. The Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, they weren't just rich, they were seen as builders. Their authority came from controlling the vital physical infrastructure, the railways, the steel that was powering the whole Industrial Revolution. People accepted their huge monopolies because they were, enabling progress.
The lesson is so clear. Control the pathways, you control the society. But today, those pathways are invisible.
The fundamental truth is exactly the same. It's just the medium has changed. It's gone from concrete and steel to fiber optics and cloud servers.
Okay, let's really get into that transformation then. If controlling the pathways is still the key, what does that look like when the pathway is just software?
The pathway is now the data ecosystem, that's the term, and it's the critical, invisible artery of modern life. When Vanderbilt built a railroad, you could see it. You knew where it began and ended. Now, when these new entities build their infrastructure, all you see is the app on your phone.
Can you give us a concrete example of that foundational power? I think that's where it really clicks.
Oh, for sure. Just look at cloud computing. Amazon Web Services hosts something like 32% of the entire global cloud market.
32%?
Yeah. I mean, think about that. It's the invisible foundation for governments, for healthcare systems, for countless global companies. If a traditional oligarch owned a third of all the world's railway tracks, it would be a huge public scandal. With this, it's just a line item in an earnings report.
And what's really fascinating to me is how sophisticated the lock-in is. It's not just that they offer a convenient service. It becomes almost impossible to leave.
Precisely. That's the real gatekeeping power. It's not just about market share. It's the technical switching costs. If your whole business is built around proprietary APIs from one cloud provider, moving your data, the so-called data egress costs, could literally bankrupt you. That creates a structural dependency that's just so much stronger than, say, an old railway access agreement.
So in the same way an old port authority decided which ships could dock, today's platforms use their algorithms to decide which services or content, which businesses really even get seen by the user.
And that control becomes more and more invisible. It's embedded into the operational code. These algorithms now decide your credit score, what job ads you see, even the perceived truth of the news you're reading. That's a level of influence that rivals, if not completely surpasses, the old industrial monopolies because it's constant and there's almost no public debate about it.
So if that invisible infrastructure is the body, then maintaining digital trust, that's the oxygen that keeps the whole thing alive. I mean, how do they keep our trust when the systems are so opaque and we're all worried about data security?
It's a very subtle game. Traditional trust was a handshake, a reputation in town. Digital trust is about convincing billions of people to rely on code they can't see and security they don't understand. The playbook is all about shifting the focus away from ownership and control and towards this perception of integrity and reliability.
It sounds less like actually being trustworthy and more about managing the perception of it.
That's exactly right. It's all about strategic communication. One of the key methods we see is something we can call transparency theater. Platforms know they have to respond to regulatory pressure, so they'll publish these huge, exhaustive privacy policies or data usage reports.
And the theater part means it looks open, but doesn't actually reveal anything important?
Precisely. You create the impression of accountability. You release a 200-page document full of legal jargon that technically satisfies the disclosure requirement, but is basically unreadable for the public, and even for most regulators. It's a performance of good faith that actually maintains total secrecy.
You also mentioned something called reputation laundering. How does that play out?
That's all about strategic association.
Yeah.
So a huge digital platform partners with a very respected university, or maybe a nonprofit, that works on democratic principles. By doing that, they borrow the historical trust that those institutions have built over decades.
Yeah.
It helps to, offset the public's skepticism about their own data practices. It's credibility by association.
And the other two pillars are about keeping people on the platform. Network effects and algorithmic consistency.
Correct. The network effect is simple. The platform is essential because everyone you know is already there. The sheer pain of losing all those connections and that data, it just outweighs any concerns you might have about privacy. And algorithmic consistency just means it works reliably. You search, you get a result, you post, it gets shared. That builds a habit. You stop questioning the system when the utility is so seamless.
So putting it all together, they position themselves as these neutral providers, these stewards of an essential service, all while they're actually maintaining total control over the flow of information and subtly guiding what's seen as acceptable behavior inside their walls.
And that kind of functional control, without any overt governing, leads us straight into the deepest layer, the shadow networks. This is where the truly hidden mechanisms are.
Okay, so let's define that. When we say shadow networks, we're talking about systems that operate completely under the radar. They coordinate strategy and shape outcomes without any public announcement.
And we need to be clear about how they're structured. It's not one big conspiracy. It's about connections. It happens through three main channels. First, investment portfolios. And I don't just mean owning some stock, I mean interconnected strategic investments. You'll see the same powerful investment firms holding controlling stakes in what look like competing companies.
So they don't even have to merge. They just need a common, powerful shareholder or a few board members in common who can push for aligned strategies.
Exactly. That common interest ensures they collaborate on the big things, like lobbying against certain regulations or adopting a new industry standard that benefits them all. The second channel is advisory boards. These are stacked with retired politicians, former regulators, influential academics. Their advice guides policies that ripple through the whole industry, often setting the agenda long before government regulators even start thinking about it.
And then there's the really technical, opaque part, the data sharing agreements.
This is where so much of the hidden dependency is created. A smaller company, maybe a fintech startup, might use a major cloud platform's identity verification service. It seems like a simple, efficient partnership. But the agreement gives the bigger platform deep, granular insight into the startup's operations. It creates a functional dependency, not a legal one. The flow of data becomes the flow of control.
This is where it gets really interesting if you're watching this play out in real time. Can you give us an example of how you'd see this indirect influence in the wild?
Look for moments of industry-wide coordination that don't have an obvious public cause. For instance, when you see 2, 3, maybe even 4 major and supposedly competing platforms all tweak their content algorithms in the same week. And they often use very similar language, talking about public safety or fighting misinformation.
Right. And you might think that's just them competing, but you're saying it could point to a coordinated effort behind the scenes to manage public conversation.
It suggests a strategic alignment, absolutely. It's either driven by a shared legal defense strategy cooked up in those shadow advisory boards, or it's a result of the technical dependencies we just talked about. You also see it when certain narratives, whether they're social or political, just suddenly gain massive widespread traction everywhere at once, while other views seem to disappear. It's not always overt censorship. It's a much more subtle manipulation of what's made visible.
The real power, then, is in the opacity. It comes from the structure of the systems they control, the invisible code, the cloud protocols. They can exert influence without ever issuing a public order.
They thrive because their decisions get absorbed into the system's routine operations. The public rarely questions the infrastructure itself. They only question the final output. By controlling the infrastructure, they control both the inputs and the outputs, and in doing so, they fundamentally shape reality without ever needing to step into the spotlight.
Okay, let's shift to the cultural side of this. You said earlier that our celebration of innovation culture actually serves as a shield for this new oligarchy. How does that work? How does constant change help them maintain control?
Innovation is the key difference between the digital oligarchs and the old industrial barons. The industrial monopolies, they resisted change. These new oligarchs thrive on it. And the reason is simple. Continuous renewal strengthens reliance.
How does it do that?
Well, take the platform ecosystem model. They encourage these huge developer communities. They offer open APIs. They fund startups. On the surface, that looks like the democratization of technology, right? But strategically, it ensures that thousands of independent creators build their entire products on top of their proprietary infrastructure.
So the community does the innovating, but every new innovation just reinforces the control of the original platform owner. The better the apps get, the deeper the lock-in for the core platform.
Precisely. The act of external innovation becomes a powerful mechanism of control. It dramatically increases the network effects. And then if the main platform decides to pivot, all of those independent businesses have to pivot right along with them. It just reinforces that centralized power.
And this feeds right into their bigger strategies, quickly acquiring any emerging competitor before it becomes a real threat, making those strategic pivots based on user data, and pouring money into research to influence not just their products, but the underlying standards for the entire industry, and of course, future regulation.
And all of this creates what we're calling quiet influence. It's power that operates so far below public awareness that it's rarely even seen as a form of control. It's all subtle dynamics, not loud commands.
And you feel it every day. You choose a service not because you love the company, but because, well, everyone else uses it, or because some other critical tool you need depends on it. That is the ultimate expression of quiet influence. They didn't force you. They just made themselves necessary through this slow, accumulated dependency.
And that necessity is now being framed as infrastructural stewardship. That's the most sophisticated play. They aren't just selling a product anymore. They are positioning themselves as the caretakers of essential global systems payment networks, cloud services, communication itself.
And if you're the caretaker, then any attempt to regulate you is framed as an attack on an essential public utility.
That's the genius of it, from a regulatory perspective. Power is accumulated through utility, not through domination. When your dependency feels like convenience, like the lights just coming on when you flip a switch, it becomes socially and politically acceptable. They are necessary, and therefore they are seen as legitimate.
So this whole deep dive really shows that this new oligarchy is operating through subtlety, through dependency. The tools they use, infrastructure, trust systems, shadow networks, are just fundamentally different from what our traditional regulations were ever designed to handle.
The implications for society are, well, they're profound. And we have to start asking the right questions. Can governments even develop frameworks to address this kind of invisible controlled things like proprietary APIs or data egress costs without completely killing innovation? That's the real challenge of regulatory adaptation.
And tied directly to that is the question of democratic participation. I mean, when the essential roads for public debate and for commerce are privately owned, how do we, as citizens, keep any meaningful agency? Our access to everything is now mediated by systems that are completely outside of public governance.
And finally, we have to urgently redefine transparency. What kind of disclosure standards should apply to an entity that manages the critical data infrastructure that our entire economy, even our national defense, relies on? The current model of transparency theater is obviously not enough.
These structures aren't coming. They're already here. They're powerful. So the focus has to shift away from trying to prevent them from forming. That ship has sailed. The focus now has to be on deeply understanding how they work so we can build accountability structures to ensure that this incredible concentration of digital power doesn't permanently undermine the public interest.
And that dialogue, the one that connects technology, policy, and public awareness, that is the most important infrastructure project we face today.